I roasted 3 batches of the same coffee. They're all low temp roasts, Guatemalas. I kept a number of the variables the same, but I did a pretty drastic approach difference. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to talk to you about the roasts that I did. I'm going to brew up the 3 different batches, and I'm going to taste them and tell you what the differences are that I'm observing. Now, one thing to know is that these are going to be observations that are true about this coffee. It's not exactly transferable to all coffees, but this is the type of thing that I do often. I'm just trying to show everybody what it is that I go through in my process to begin to understand how to adjust roasts and adjust approaches to bring out specific flavors in coffees, okay? My goal was to have some other things to be exactly the same, but I was okay with having the finished roast temperature just fall where it lay and talk through the roast, okay? So I'm gonna open this up. I like to use a countertop coffee brewer, and like I've talked about in other videos, I used to do a French press. French press is very similar to cupping, but both French press and cupping, there's no paper filter involved. And what I realized is that most people use paper filters when they're brewing coffee, whether it's a pour over, which is what I do when I'm drinking my coffee, or whether they're using a countertop machine like this. Either one, they are using paper, and having paper present in the brewing drastically changes what the cup tastes like. There's many roasters who, when they're drinking their coffee, that their roasts and checking for quality control, many of them are going to be doing a cupping process, like doing the standard cupping process, which is awesome, no problem. I use this because I'm not trying to figure out a purchasing decision and understand what's the rawest form of this bean, which is what cupping process really is great at showing you. I'm wanting to experience the final product. I'm wanting to try this as a customer is going to try it and adjust my roasting according to that. While this brews, I want to talk through these roasts. So I have with me my roasting notes. I've let these sit for a couple days to let them off gas, which is, a pretty important thing to do if you're wanting to get a clear picture of the coffees. They all were a 15-pound roast. They all had the same charge temperature, so I started the roast with the temperature at 400 degrees, and I did the same amount of time in the third phase, in the development phase, which I did a 2-minute development on it, okay? Which I chose 2 minutes because there's many roasts that I do that are just a minute and 15, a minute and 30 seconds. When you have roasts that are 2-minute long development, they have pushed beyond that first presentation. So when you have coffees that are really bright and tart, the body is thin, those are all going to be coming from a minute 15, a minute and 30. Things begin changing development-wise about a minute and 45, but if you make it to 2 minutes of development, you have a very different presentation of the coffee. So for these purposes, I wanted to keep the same mass, and I wanted to have this 2-minute end chunk for development. And how I moved the roast through that was going to be the one variable that I did. With this first batch here, I did a method where I applied high heat right away, and I kept that high heat pushing up until we entered the second phase. So the second phase, you know that you're in it because the Maillard reaction has fully started. And a lot of times they call the second phase the browning phase. And it's where your beans have gone from being green to starting to take on, they have begun browning. So they aren't brown yet. They actually, you mark going into the second phase by the beans turning yellow. 300 degrees is a good marker on my machine, and most machines that I've roasted on, that is applicable. With this first roast, I was applying high heat for the whole first phase, and I entered the second phase, and then I began drastically cutting the heat. In this approach, I brought it up fast, the environment to its final finish roast, to its final environmental temperature, and then I adjusted my flame to keep it at that temperature. And then it entered the second phase. From that point on, I kept my environmental temperature steady by continuing to bring my flame down, but I stayed a steady environmental temperature. All in all, it took me 11 minutes and 19 seconds. I dropped the batch at 401 finish roast temperature. Okay, 2 minutes of development on a 15-pound batch. I'm gonna taste this first batch and see what. The acidity is present right away. It's really sharp. There's not a ton of sweetness, but the body in the finish is very smooth. There's a touch of chocolate in the finish as well, where it's like a smooth touch of chocolate. But the acidity is very forefront, very present. This specific coffee has a lot of papaya notes in it. It's sharp and it's close. And then as you drink it and as you you're done having it in your mouth and you've swallowed it, you can taste everything kind of opens up and it becomes rounder with a nice finish. Okay, so the second batch, which we're brewing right now, 15 pounds, 400 degrees charge. Now, instead of going to 6 inches of flame or 100%, I did 4 inches of flame. Now the idea behind this one, when I charge the beans, when I begin the roast and I throw the beans in there, it's not going to be a huge shock to the beans. It's actually going to take quite a bit of time for them to turn around in temperature and begin to build momentum. But I didn't touch the flame for 8 minutes, okay? So I left it at 4, and I left it, and I let it take on heat and slowly build and slowly build. And so it ends up kind of having its peak movement and its peak push well into the second phase. It's actually like 20 degrees, I think, before I'm hitting first crack. So with this first roast, I pushed it hard and I got to the environmental temperature and I held it there and the beans just got rocket shipped up there and just held and went right through. This batch, lower heat, and it slowly built momentum and slowly built, and then it really began moving fast towards the latter half of the roast. Now this batch was 1 minute and 5 seconds longer than the first batch. So this is gonna have overall roasting time. This is in the roaster for over 1 minute longer than this batch. But this wasn't a super intense roast. This is like pretty easy, pretty mellow, nothing aggressive. And we just like let the environment and the beans slowly get there. And I never was at a very high flame setting. I was at 4 inches, and then 8 minutes into the roast, I brought it down to 2.6. And then I kind of tapered it from there. So 60% down to 40%. Still had 2 minutes of development time on it. And this finish roast temperature was just a touch lower at 399, whereas the first batch was 401. So while this cools for a sec, we'll open up our third batch and see what this one was like. So, second batch, minute longer overall time. The acidity is turned way down. And the first thing that I noticed with this batch, the first thing I noticed is the body. This one is very smooth around the edges from front to back. With the first batch, I really noticed it's quite a ride from beginning to end of drinking it. The second batch, it's very smooth from front to back. You aren't going spiking up with acidity and then going down to a smooth body in the end. From front to back, it is really steady and really even. The papaya notes in this one come out towards the end, where you have like heavy, smooth notes right at the beginning, and then as you're finishing it, it brings forward those papaya notes. So it's a lighter finish and more fruit present in the end of that one. Where this first roast, I mean, it is in your face with acidity and brightness. And I think part of that is going to have to do with it's just a shorter batch. So acidity is always the first thing to go in any roast. It will leave long before the other notes do. And so part of the difference in these two is just simply going to be the time spent. But also, this was a very forward, very aggressive batch that had you have to think about that second phase. The second phase of this was 3 minutes and 49 seconds. The second phase of this was 4 minutes and 16 seconds. So you've got a longer second phase, and the overall roast was longer, toning down some of the acidity. So why would a person want to be able to tone down acidity? Sometimes acidity within a coffee is so harsh and so present that you need to tone it down. It's too strong. And there are some acidities that can be metallic or vegetal, like it can taste like tomato paste and things like that. I don't want that in the cup. But if you tone it down and set it back within the roast, it's really pleasing having it combined with sweetness and body or whatever attributes your coffee has. So you want to be able to learn, how can I tone down acidity without losing it? Well, this is a really nice option, because when you first drink it, what you're met with is it's smooth, and then these fruit notes come up afterwards. I'm pretty excited to try this third batch, which was 15 pounds, 400 degree charge, but I started out at 100% heat, and throughout the entire roast, slowly brought it down. I let the environment creep up the entire time. It continued to climb well into the second phase, whereas the first roast, it climbed to that finished environmental temperature before I hit second phase, and I held it there. This one, I slowly climbed it, reached that finished environmental temperature way into the roast. And this one was between the two. It landed it before this one did and after this one did. So it was really gradual, but it still was more heat, more aggressive roasting than this one was. But I drew out the time longer than this first one. 4 minutes and 5 seconds was this second phase. 4 minutes, 15 seconds, 3 minutes and 45 seconds. So this batch really was a mix and approach between this one, where you kind of had the beginning of how this one was roasted, as in high flame, Where this one kept going high flame until we hit it. I started high flame and then I just slowly just brought it down and let this roast just evenly go. The overall time was 11 minutes and 43 seconds. This one was 12 minutes, 26 seconds. And this one was 11 minutes and 19 seconds. So you'd look at these two and say, this is about a 30-second difference. 11:20, 11:50, 11:15, 11:45, somewhere in there. And then this one was 12:26, something like that. The acidity is still toned down. This is still less than our first batch. It's really interesting because there isn't as much to note right away, as these two had some distinction to each of these roasts, where this is the most undefined out of the three of them. Now, it is piping hot, and what we know about coffee is as it cools, you are presented with more of the flavors of what's going on within the cup than when it's super hot. But you still need to drink the coffees as they're super hot, because that is how people drink them. And people love really hot coffee, so you need to try it like that. I'm curious to see what this is going to taste like as it mellows, as the temperature goes down. The acidity in this one, how bright and juicy and sharp it is, still is holding up in this cup, which is very lukewarm. And this one is so smooth and so even, with really nice fruit notes coming out at the end. And I mean, as you'd expect from these approaches, this one really is in the middle of these two, you know. But what's funny is that I would say this roast profile is something that a lot of roasters use. High heat, just slowly bring it back down, just push the whole thing very forward, and 11 minutes and 45 seconds roast, like it's very common. 2-minute development, totally normal. 400, 399, like this is a totally common roast. But so you would think, hey, we had some nice attributes about this, and we had some nice attributes about this, and we'll just do something in between and have, parts of, the best of both worlds. But this one's okay. It's nice, it's fine, but it's not distinct in any way. Like if I were to go out and get this coffee at a coffee shop, cafe, it's not enough of one thing or another for me. It doesn't have that nice, sharp, bright edge to it, complexity meeting me right away. And it doesn't have like this really smooth, silky body with like gentle fruit notes. It's right down the middle. And I think something that I've learned is that you want to have something distinctive one way or another. Shooting for right down the middle or safe roasts don't really yield anything for a person to take away from when they're drinking the coffee. So this is a very enlightening experience, and would drastically affect how I move forward with this coffee and how I roast it and what I know these approaches yield with this lot. So I hope you found it helpful. you got to try these same things yourself, see what you learn, try them with other people, talk to them about it. It's always best to drink coffee with more people than just yourself. And it's always important to speak out loud what it is that you're tasting, and just begin to practice that vocabulary and learn the muscles of like trying things and saying out loud. It's a good skill to have. So I hope this was helpful, and good luck roasting.